Hi, this is the video for Monday, May 3rd. So I'm back to making these videos for this week and next week because of AP exams. I figure people are missing class and you can quickly catch up on what you missed. I didn't make them for last week because when I checked my YouTube analytics, it was like really sad. Nobody was watching them. And if you wished I had, then tell me. I'll make a video for last week, but only by request. So Monday, May 3rd. We are looking at structure in poetry today and tomorrow. And that's because, in my experience, that gives students a little bit of angst just in the moments before the AP exam. And I want to give you that last burst of confidence that you can do this before you go to take the exam. Of the students taking the AP exam, most are taking it this Wednesday, May 5th. And if you're not taking it till the 18th, that's, I think, only a couple of you. We will keep reviewing you and me if you like. All right, so AP exam aside, this is just one of my favorite poems that we're talking about today, and I love talking about the way that structure is used in this poem. So we started class with an icebreaker of Kahoot, and if you're watching this video, by the time you watch it, I will have assigned this to you in a self-paced way. The Kahoot is 5 multiple choice questions about Elizabeth Bishop's poem, One Art. It's really useful for practice for that exam on Wednesday because it's really trying to get you with some of that AP literature language around cliches and background knowledge pieces as distractors from the real answer. So anyway, come back to the slides and complete the Kahoot if you're watching the video. This is the poem we considered. One Art by Elizabeth Bishop. I assigned this for reading over the weekend. If you did not, press pause and read it, and then come back. All right. So what is this about? And what is she not saying? Or, as I put it in the slideshow, how do you know she's lying? What is this really about? Read closely the words and phrases that you see. So this was a discussion in our class, but for you in the video, I'm just going to talk through how do you know she's lying? Well, first of all, what's the lie? The 2 lines that repeat in this poem are the lie. The art of losing is not hard to master. To be lost, that their loss is no disaster. Losing things brings no disaster. Both of those things are lies. The first, the art of losing isn't hard to master, we see that repeated throughout the poem, is a lie. And we know that because the speaker of the poem cannot actually master it. Each stanza, the speaker tries to lose more, tries to lose faster. But in fact, by the end of it, by the last stanza, the speaker says, it's evident the art of losing is not too hard to master, even though it might look like disaster. And so, actually, the loss is a disaster. They're not willing to admit it to themselves, except in this poem. But over the course of the poem, in an attempt to master, they actually find they lose control. The things get bigger and bigger and bigger that are being lost, and harder and harder and harder to master. That's lie number 1. Lie number 2, their loss is no disaster, is also a lie because, especially at the very end, you know that right at that little moment where the writer speaks to themselves, admits it looks like disaster. It actually might be a disaster. Losing you, it looks like and it is a disaster. And so we go from their loss is no disaster, none of these will bring disaster, I missed them but it wasn't a disaster, to the final moment where it looks like disaster. The tone is how you know these are lies. The words do not give it away. Why are we led to believe that the speaker is not being honest with themselves? In part, it's clear that the speaker is lying to themselves, although, they're writing a poem about it, so they're doing it very conscientiously, which means it's not really a lie, but they're writing a poem about lying to themselves. because they keep repeating it. There's a famous quote from Shakespeare in Hamlet, where Hamlet's mom is really protesting this idea that Hamlet's dad was killed on purpose. Well, she knows he was. And Hamlet says, "The lady doth protest too much." That line applies here. When you protest too much that something is not true, it might just be true. And here, the repetition of the art of losing is not too hard to master, it's not too hard to master, it's not too hard to master, is a manic repetition. After a while, we realize, why is the speaker continuing to harp on this? Perhaps it is hard to master. Perhaps the speaker continues to say this to themselves again and again and again, if wishing would make it so. That's one way that we can see through the language, is the repetition. But then the other way is tiny movements in the words and phrases that reveal a crack in each facade. At first, the language that's manifest, it seems acceptable. Lose something every day, except the fluster of lost door keys, the hour badly spent. The art of losing isn't hard to master. But then, when she or he, the speaker writes, losing faster, places and names, and where it was you meant to travel, there's a wistfulness there. How can you really lose that wish? The wish to have gone somewhere. Immediately, the speaker writes, none of these will bring disaster, and I'm starting to question the speaker. Then the speaker loses my mother's watch, a really sentimental item. And look, my last or next to last of 3 loved houses went, and there's a sadness there too. Will this be the last house? Will it not? Am I going to live longer? Will I not? There is an emotional component even to this stanza that shows the speakers starting to lose their grip. Then, in the last stanza, our only quatrain, all of these little cracks come into a full fracture. Even losing you. We have 2 sets of parentheses in this quatrain, and the first one shows that they're becoming self-aware of their lie. The joking voice, a gesture I love. Losing you makes me use this joking voice, a gesture that I love because it covers up how I'm feeling. I shan't have lied. It's evident the art of losing is not too hard to master, though it may look like, and then the second parentheses, write it. That, to me, write it, is the speaker admitting, I cannot write this down. This is so difficult for me. I don't want to admit it, and I'm going to force my hand to admit it. This looks like a disaster. So, yeah, the art of losing is not too hard to master. That's what the speaker would like to believe, and what the speaker would like us maybe even to see that they believe. But the truth is, there are quite a lot of disasters in a life that are brought about by the loss of things, especially the loss of this someone at the end. There is more to say. It's a villanelle. Why a villanelle? There is an important trope in poetry, as with any art form, that sometimes you need to do something unnecessary or adhere to unnecessary obstacles. Once you limit yourself to a box, your freedom really can open up. It's in limiting yourself that you have freedom. It's this wonderful and crazy contradiction. Think of all sports ever. All of them are adherence to unnecessary obstacles. Why do we do that? They're silly at times when you think about the obstacles that are put into place, whether those obstacles are time or distance or space. Sports is about limiting the athlete to see what they can do within those limitations. Nobody actually can thrive with complete freedom. There's a wonderful metaphor of a fish. A fish is meant to swim in water. If you were to give the fish unlimited freedom, then you could take the fish out of the water and let them flop around on the land and say, there you are, freedom. The fish would die. The fish is going to thrive when they are in the environment in which they are suited, when they are constrained. We are similar. We will thrive when we are constrained. A poem has a voice too, a calling. And the poem, the content of the poem, will thrive if it's put in the right box. So why'd you pick a villanelle? We're going to keep asking that question. What is villanelle? It means peasant or farm worker. It's supposed to be an earlier, simpler trope that it started with this idea. Sestinas, sonnets, these were for high-class writers, but villanelles were for the peasantry. Simple movements, song and dance, going in rhythms like this in circles. Well, villanelles now are a lot more complicated than that, but Bishop is leveraging some of those rhythmic qualities for her poem. What is it really? It's repetition, repetition, repetition. So the first line and the third line of the first stanza are going to repeat themselves as the very last line for every subsequent tercet. Let me say that again. The art of losing isn't hard to master. That first line is going to repeat itself as the last line of the second stanza and the fourth stanza, and then in the final stanza it'll show up again. And then its partner line, to be lost that their loss is no disaster, that has to repeat at the end of the first stanza and the third stanza and the fifth stanza. So it's taking turns back and forth with those alternating last lines. Both last lines come together in the very last stanza. The art of losing isn't hard to master, though it looks like disaster. It's a really controlled form. We're going to see one more villanelle. It'll be your BGD today, and you'll be able to apply that structure. So why would you do this? Well, what does the repetition do? We already kind of covered it. It's partly establishing that tone, that manic tone. There is some wonderful commentary here on her original drafts. Got this open here. It is considered, one of the best villanelles in existence. And there's 16 drafts written total. Pretty quickly, it establishes a villanelle form. And this is what the writer here has to say that I find to be really beautiful. Bishop suggests these losses in a villanelle, a quiet, elegant form. The villanelle gives the list dignity that it wouldn't have in free verse. It's part of a form. But in the villanelle, each thing leans over and kisses us on the cheek as it passes. This is a really nice metaphor. When a poet finds the right form for a poem, the tuning fork of the poem sounds right to the ear. The poem has a balance it wouldn't otherwise. And then down here, this paragraph, I thought would be a guiding light for us. Writing poems is like taking music lessons. We begin writing down our thoughts. We begin with the technical work of writing sentences, and then the unexpected music rises out of the words. The poem isn't thinking anymore, it is singing. It has departed into the music of its life. The fact that the poem becomes a villanelle so soon in its birth makes me believe that this poem has a form in it that it is called to. The poem wants to be a villanelle. So this poem wants to be a villanelle. Ideas of losing and loss and the attempt to get over loss, they bring the poem to a villanelle that repeats itself to infinity. You actually can never master this, although we try. And maybe that's what life has been so often in its struggles, is an attempt to cope with loss. A rhythm you will continue practicing your whole life, and yet you will never master it. It's really sad. But at the same time, by having control to it, by having a pattern to it, by recognizing that it comes and goes, there's a beauty to an ebb and a flow. And it gives it meaning, gives it freedom, even in the black box, the difficult to understand, constrained space of its problem. So do this, please. Do this with Dylan Thomas. Your BGD is to answer the question, what is the function of the structure of his poem? It's also a villanelle. In a spirit of unnecessary obstacles, I am challenging you to write your question's answer in exactly 17 words. And it's not a real unnecessary obstacle test unless I offer some sort of prize. So I actually am going to choose a winner. The best response gets a $5 gift card to Starbucks like I did that one time. So there's your game right here. In your response, see what freedom you can find. That's all.